Hello, friends. My name is Dean, and I want to welcome you to Community Church. And we're just so glad that we were able to put together and host this event. Thank you, Sarah Towle, for making this all possible and for doing a lot of really wonderful publicity to get us all together here. I see a lot of new faces. Some of you might not have been here before. We call ourselves a peace and justice community since 1920. And we have this very rich history that's, a lot of it is right in this building. We have 5 stories of different archives of things that we've done over the years. And I won't go deep into that, but I will go from our history into our present, which is all in this newsletter here. Take one of these, there's a bunch of them on the table. It has the next 2 months of our programs, and I'll just talk about 2 that are coming up this Sunday. We have a program every Sunday morning, 11 a.m., and it's Indigenous Peoples Week, and let's say October 12th. And our speaker is named Christian Nill. He was a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala during 1981 and 82, the worst part of the massacre of indigenous people there. And he has a story to tell, as written in his memoir, which is called Walking with Evaristo. Do I have a copy of it? Yes, it's right here. Should be a really interesting program. The music that morning is David Rovick's. If you don't know about his music, you should come just to hear David. He is traveling people's troubadour like you won't believe, and every time he's anywhere near, we drop everything and host David. He will have another concert, a full concert. This is just the Sunday music that he does. He and his partner, another full concert on Saturday, October 19th. Is that right? 18th or 19th. So check out that as well. And there's a whole lot of other events that we are constantly hosting here at the church. And we'd be glad to get your email address and keep you posted about good trouble that we're getting into and trying to get into deeper as we sink deeper into fascism here in this country. But we're talking about immigration, and I just want to open with a song. I have deep roots in Central America, born and grew up in Costa Rica and travel frequently to El Salvador and Nicaragua. And I have a song that I want to start with that I think will hopefully set the tone. And it's called Casa Abierta, and I hope that's what this church is to you. That's what this country is to the rest of the world. And it says, open house, there's a plate for you at our table, the shade of a tree for your head. Our door is an open book to your life. Open house. Friendship doesn't distinguish. The planet wants us to love without distinction of color or cult or flag. Open house. Casa Abierta. Oh boy, I didn't bring my guitar strap. The author's name is Salvador Cardenal. Quiero estar bien con mis hermanos, de norte a sur al fin del mundo, querer oír y dar mis manos, sudar jugando algo bien sano. Todos aquí somos humanos. ¿Qué más me da el color, la raza? Dentro tenemos sentimientos que necesitan de sustento. Si adentro hay buenos sentimientos, no se pueden quedar adentro. Aquí está mi casa abierta, hay un plato por ti en nuestra mesa, sombra de árbol para tu cabeza, libro abierto tu vida, mi puerta. Casa abierta, la amistad no cuestiona tu credo, a la tierra le gusta que amemos, sin distingo de culto y bandera. Casa abierta, casa abierta, casa abierta. Quisiera darte buena suerte y ser tu amigo hasta la muerte, que la distancia no me entuma y la amistad no se consuma. Todos aquí somos humanos, ¿qué más me da el color, la raza? Dentro tenemos sentimientos que necesitan de sustento. Si adentro hay buenos sentimientos, no se pueden quedar adentro. Aquí está mi casa abierta, hay un plato por ti en nuestra mesa, sombra de árbol para tu cabeza, libro abierto tu vida, mi puerta. Casa abierta, la amistad no cuestiona tu credo, a la tierra le gusta que amemos sin distingo de culto y bandera. Casa abierta, hay un plato por ti en nuestra mesa. Casa abierta, sombra de árbol para tu cabeza. Casa abierta, la amistad no cuestiona tu credo. Casa abierta, y a la tierra le gusta que amemos. Casa abierta, sin distingo de culto y bandera. Casa abierta, aquí está mi casa abierta. So let's get this started and welcome Sarah Towle, all the way from England, has just flown a far distance to be with us and do a kickoff on a book tour, and we're so happy that you're with us and waiting to hear and learn from you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean. It's very rare. This is like, I think I counted them up today, and this is about my 85th event. And the first to be introduced with a beautiful tune from Nicaragua, where I once lived and worked, once upon a time. So, let me get my... All right. So again, thank you, Dean, and thank you, Community Church of Boston, for that wonderful introduction. I am super grateful and honored to be with you all today to talk about what might be the most urgent and pressing challenge of our age: immigration. And the reason I say that is because immigration intersects with all other issues we face: the health of our economy, historic income inequality, labor and human rights, racism and climate breakdown, dissolving human rights values, government corruption around the acceleration of artificial intelligence, and the divisions caused by disinformation that have led to culture wars so divisive we cannot even talk to each other anymore, much less come together to resolve our differences, which is why I contend that immigration has become the weapon now driving our democracy into crisis. I'm going to start today by telling you a little bit about who I am, how I came to write my book, what I learned through the process, and I will end in collaboration with my co-presenters here from MIRA, from API's CAN, and from LUCE to offer you some ideas, some resources, and agency to turn your outrage in the face of what we're dealing with today into action. My hope is that gatherings such as these can help us all raise above the despair I'm going to assume you share with me as we increasingly descend into darker times, and that instead we find a way forward together. When I wrote Crossing the Line, we were dealing with a manufactured border crisis. Now the crisis is real, and it is everywhere. So to start with me, I'm an international educator and an economic migrant, but I get to call myself an expat because of my white skin and my blue passport. I've made a career of offering welcome to newcomers and dignity to asylum seekers and refugees as an English language and literacy teacher, a cross-cultural communications consultant, a conflict mediator, social and emotional learning educator, and a writing coach. I've taught on 4 continents, across the age span, and in myriad classroom contexts, including under the trees in refugee settings, such as in El Salvador during the era of the US-funded Central American dirty wars. But even with that background, I never really understood the depth of the brokenness of our immigration system until June 2018, when the first Trump regime sparked the cries of Alison Jimena Valencia Madrid. These were cries heard round the world. Now, I'm sure you remember it too. A small child made to memorize a phone number in a moment of panic when her mother realized they were about to be pulled apart. A six-year-old made to grow up all too fast, begging a Border Patrol official to please call her auntie, reciting the phone number over and over and over again through veils of tears while other children sobbed in the background, and the agent laughed off their heartbreak as an orchestra without a conductor. That muffled 8-minute recording was taken from the pocket, we think, of a whistleblower. Someone inside the Ursula Processing Center in McAllen, Texas. I put processing in air quotes because whether we call them processing centers or detention centers, or whether we give them some crazy cruel moniker like Alligator Alcatraz, these are facilities encased in coils and coils of razor wire, itself a tool designed to shred human flesh. And they exist to cage people. They are prisons. Prisons that lock up people who have largely committed no crime, unless you believe that running for your life is a criminal act. Many, if not most, of those incarcerated in these places come to the United States, the self-styled beacon of hope, seeking a safer and more productive life for themselves and their children, which is their legal and human right. Some of them have been among us for years. Many grew up here, built careers here, created families here. They are no less baseball and apple pie than you and me. But few of us knew anything about the conditions inside these facilities before hearing Alison Jimena's cries. And when we did, what did we do? We rose up in collective indignation. Our outrage sparked spontaneous action. We took to the streets. Many of you will remember that in those horrifying days of June 2018, we marched. We marched under the banner of Families Belong Together. We mounted 750 demonstrations around the globe, 600 in the US alone. And on June 20th, 2018, family separation was supposedly ended by presidential Sharpie. But it never really ended. And it continues to this day. What's more, the practice did not start in 2018. That's just when it was made policy, not a consequence of policy, and put on display for the cameras by an administration that wanted to be cruel, that wore U.S. immigration cruelty like a badge of honor. In my research, however, I would come to document 8 ways in which our immigration policies and practices separate families, and have done so for decades, across administrations on both sides of the political aisle. Today, every time ICE raids a workplace, or drags someone out of their car, or knocks down the door of a private home, families are torn apart. Loved ones are separated. Now, I did not know in June 2018 that family separation was a feature, not a bug, of the U.S. immigration system. I had much to learn, but it was family separation that was the inciting incident, if you will, that propelled me on a journey across the 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexico line, ultimately resulting in this book. Crossing the Line, Finding America in the Borderlands begins in a refugee encampment just across the Rio Grande from Brownsville, Texas, on the threshold of the world's richest nation. An encampment of 3,000 people thrust into homelessness by the first Trump administration's migrant protection protocols, or Remain in Mexico program, which didn't protect anyone at all. A tent encampment of 3,000 mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, aunties, uncles, grandparents, and tiny babies, representing 70,000 individuals all across the U.S.-Mexico line, 1/3 of them children, no threat to anyone, certainly not to U.S. national security, trapped in some of the most dangerous places on earth by the so-called leader of the free world. Crossing the Line ends on 2 mass deportation flights dubbed death planes, boxcars in the sky, and flying Abu Ghraibs during the first Trump mass deportation campaign, the one few people knew about, but which is documented in my book, and the likes of which this second regime has now turned into a daily fact of life, harnessing Department of Homeland Security enforcement agencies as private presidential paramilitaries, complete with masked men bearing arms instead of judicial warrants. Until January 2025, my book was only one of 2 public accounts to document what actually takes place on an ICE air expulsion flight, what we might now call abduction or kidnapping flights, precisely because previous administration did not want us to know. This one does, and the legal and human rights violations are myriad. They defy faith values. They defy democratic values. They defy moral values. They defy human decency. They cross the line, powered by cruelty for cruelty's sake, and I'm here to tell you, the cruelty is not okay. Some have called Crossing the Line the primer text to the immigration issue, the best place to start before digging into my extensive bibliography, which you can find online. Still others have called it a handbook for a more humane world, because it holds up to the light the tales and voices of roughly 100 people, including those of individuals trapped under the cruel knee of our immigration system, but also those of first responders who have been tirelessly waging a grassroots war of welcome for years, some of whom are right here in our midst. Last November 2024, the handbook transformed, literally overnight, into what more and more people are calling a manual for a movement that recognizes the need for just migration, a movement I hope you'll consider joining, if you haven't already, by the time this evening is over. Now, I had many mentors and guides on what would become a journey of awakening to this issue that I recount in my book. Folks who, once compelled to bear witness to the human costs of our immigration system, could never, ever look away again. They're just ordinary people, like you and me, expressing extraordinary acts of kindness every day, who show us that, indeed, there is a better way, that we can welcome newcomers with dignity, and that we'd be a much better nation and people for it. It's these first responders, these warriors of welcome, as I call them, who are providing the answers to the seemingly intractable situation we find ourselves in, not just here in the US, but worldwide today. And we need only to look to them to see who we can be, who we should be, who we must be, and who many of us believe we already are. Yet across the nation, from California to Massachusetts, from Florida to Washington State, and everywhere in between, like most recently in Chicago and right here in Boston, they are being criminalized, ostracized, intimidated for their kindness. And the criminalization of caregivers and newcomers alike has been amped up by degrees under the second Trump regime, as more and more people who've tried to migrate the so-called right way, who are trying to follow the rules, are being labeled the worst of the worst without proof and are being kidnapped off our streets, out of their homes, from work sites and places of worship, and trafficked in chains to prison camps, 80% of which are operated for profit. I weave their stories of impacted safety seekers as well as first responders, provided to me through ethnographic research and oral testimony, into the historical markers and milestones essential to ground their tales in greater context. Then into those two story strands, I weave a third, my journey of awakening to a world I did not perceive before June 2018, but whose creation I have come to understand began right around the time of my birth and grew up all around me, all around all of us, hiding in plain sight, just outside our privileged view. The world is called the border industrial complex. The offspring of the Cold War era military industrial complex and the sibling of the post 9/11 national security state, the border industrial complex encircles the globe like a second equator, cleaving north and south asunder, dividing the wealthy, predominantly white world from the less wealthy, less white one, creating a global apartheid, where borders, which have always been tools of in-group, out-group exclusion, are growing deeper and taller and angrier and more violent all the time. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, for example, there were 12 such barriers around the world. Now, those of you who were alive at that time will remember it as a time of hope. We thought the Cold War was over. We thought we were moving toward a kinder, more diverse, more inclusive time. But it turns out we were wrong. Guess how many walls like that exist in the world today? 80 and counting. So my first learning inside the world of the border industrial complex was that it did not begin with Trump. He and his acolytes had merely been enabled by presidential administrations before them on both sides of the political aisle to crank the cruelty of the system to 11, their first time around. This time they are sending the cruelty off the charts. But here's the rub. The cruelty of the US immigration system is not their shame alone. I encountered 7 deadly specters inside the border industrial complex, which I'd like to map out for you now. The first is a bipartisan project dating back decades to extend our borders across oceans and through deserts and deep into other national territories as a way to make end runs around the 1951 Refugee Convention. That document, born of the shame of turning Jewish refugees back to their deaths in Nazi concentration camps, became the international treaty governing global asylum protections. That means that requesting asylum is never illegal. The prescriptions of the Refugee Convention were written into US law as the 1980 Refugee Act. Negotiated by Jimmy Carter shortly before he left the White House, the Refugee Act should be recognized as the law of the land, which again means that requesting asylum is never illegal. But even before the ink had dried on the legislation, the Reagan-Bush administration were flouting it. The second specter of the border industrial complex includes a 100-mile policing zone that traces the entire perimeter of our country, 100 miles inward from our seas, 100 miles north and southward from our land borders. This zone consumes 2/3 of the U.S. population, 9 of our 10 largest cities, and 6 whole states by my count, including all but just a little bit of Massachusetts, as well as the District of Columbia. It is the jurisdiction of a 60,000 member force and counting that knows no transparency. And since Trump dissolved its civil rights and civil liberties team, this force now suffers no accountability, which is troubling because these were the troops turned on all of us during the Black Lives Matter protests of the summer of 2020. And it is one of the forces being turned on us again, now in 2025. I'm speaking of Customs and Border Protection, which includes the Border Patrol, who, owing to a series of dubious 1970s Supreme Court decisions, have the right to police via racial profiling. And they do, every day. And the Supreme Court under John Roberts just gave ICE latitude to do the same. For now, ICE's ability to racially profile is supposedly limited to LA, but it's just one more of many slippery slopes in Trump's USA. And though racial profiling is not necessarily felt directly by people who look like me, it compromises all of our constitutional protections to unlawful searches and seizures under the Fourth Amendment. The third specter is the counterpart of Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. It's the 20,000 member force and counting, which we all know as ICE. Now, 20,000 may not sound like enough agents to police the entire interior of a country as large as the United States. But ICE works in collaboration with local police forces, thanks to agreements dating to 1952 and upheld under the Clinton administration in 1996 that deputize cops to do ICE's work for them. They're called 287G agreements, and they allow ICE and local police entities to state they are only going after criminals and felons and gang members and bad hombres. But here's the thing. Under the same law that houses 287G agreements, what's known as IRA, what may be a misdemeanor crime for you and me, like shoplifting or speeding or driving with a busted taillight, can be spun into an aggravated felony, criminalizing you and turning you, if you're among the 12 million people currently living in the U.S. who has never been afforded a path to citizenship, into something called a deportable alien, landing you in mandatory detention until deportation. So many of our friends, neighbors, colleagues, and family members have been returned to places they never ever knew because of these laws, and that includes 94,000 veterans of our armed forces and counting. People willing to give their lives for this country gone because of a misdemeanor crime. ICE, too, knows no transparency or accountability, though agency acts of routine violence, brutality, and impunity are legion and well documented. The agency has now been harnessed by an administration with authoritarian aspirations like a paramilitary army. And under the legislation the so-called president calls beautiful, ICE and CBP have now been bequeathed a budget bigger than the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, the Marshals Service, and the Bureau of Prisons combined. $170 billion. That's a bigger budget than most national militaries. Only the US, Russia, and Chinese militaries enjoy a bigger purse. That's money that comes from our tax dollars. The fourth specter, both ICE and Customs and Border Protection operate, as you know, under the Department of Homeland Security. But what you might not know is that their roots, the roots of the Department of Homeland Security, can be traced all the way back to the slave patrols of the pre-Civil War era through one man, Jefferson Milton Davis. He was the son of a Confederate enslaver. He became the first U.S. Border Patrol agent after having cut his teeth as a Texas Ranger, itself a product of the Ku Klux Klan, which is what the slave patrols became when the Civil War put an end to the ownership and lifelong enforced imprisonment of our fellow human beings. These are the rotten foundations upon which our present Department of Homeland Security apparatus was built. It is a white supremacist institution. The fifth specter of the border industrial complex includes, as I said before, 200 plus ICE prisons, 80% of which are run for profit by contractors paid with our tax dollars to lock up a quota of peace-seeking people on any given day. Now, on 9/11, more or less, that quota was about 5,000. Under Obama, it expanded to 35,000. Biden boosted that number to 41,500. Today, there are 61,000 people locked away and counting because Tom Homan, Stephen Miller, and Kristi Noem are committed to taking that number to 100,000 as soon as possible. Again, these people have mostly committed no crime other than to overstay a visa or enter the U.S. without inspection. Some came for work and remained. Some were carried here as children in a loved one's arms. The vast majority came to the so-called exemplar of freedom and beacon of hope, seeking safety from harm, horror, and hunger, only to be shackled, wrists in cuffs, ankles manacled, everything tied into a heavy waist chain, thrown into a jumpsuit, color-coded for alleged crime, red for perceived terrorists, and locked up in prison for profit. It's the very definition of enslavement. Trump and co. are imprisoning people, they say, to facilitate their mass deportation effort. But they are also enriching their friends, the prison profiteers, who systematically deny folks adequate food, access to legal representation, medical care, and contact with their families to benefit their bottom line. Their prisons are largely black sites, like the Everglades concentration camp. I refuse to use the administration's moniker. Let's call it what it is, a concentration camp in the Everglades, like Guantanamo Bay, like Sacat, the El Salvadoran torture prison that we paid $6 million this year to enslave Kilmar Abrego Garcia, among others, whose criminal record has yet to be established. And even if it was, we should not be treating people this way. There are international protections. There are human rights conventions. We should not be kidnapping people and renditioning them to a lifetime of imprisonment, whether in domestic or external torture centers. Human rights are being violated in our name, and the cruelty is not okay. The sixth specter of the border industrial complex includes a for-profit transportation machinery of buses and armored jails on wheels and airplanes, including military transports, and restraining devices such as the full-body apparatus called the WRAP that forces compliance on the many through the torture of the few. ICE airplanes whisk peace-seeking people away and ICE agency crimes along with them in daily expulsion missions that return folks in need of safety, always in shackles and chains, back to the very harms and fears and horrors they fled, or to third countries deemed safe. But we all know places like Sudan and Uganda are not safe. These are also places that some folks that are being renditioned there have never ever set foot in. They're places they do not know. They're places where they know no one. They are places where they will struggle to speak the language and earn a living, and places where they are separated from their family and unable to get back. The cruelty is not okay. Finally, in the world of the border industrial complex, our legal obligations on the part of folks seeking a safe and dignified life per their international legal and human rights play out every day in kangaroo courts which have so compromised the promise of due process under the law that one immigration judge once likened her job to hearing death penalty cases in traffic court-like settings. I can attest. I've been to a fair few, and they are traffic court-like settings. When denied protection, as so many are, if they get to see a judge at all, as so few do, they are deported in chains back to the harms and horrors they fled, or to harms and horrors they've yet to perceive for profit. The cruelty is not okay. Now, this entire Rube Goldberg machine, or many-headed hydra, as I call it, the Goliath of the border industrial complex, exists or was built upon the foundations of a single theory. It's called prevention through deterrence. But I prefer to call it deterrence through cruelty, because the theory posits if we make northward migration as dangerous and difficult and painful and perilous as possible, those who survive it, and many don't, will send word back home, do not come, do not come. But they continue to come, because prevention through deterrence does not work. It has never worked. It is now over 31 years old, enacted on October 1st, 1994, 9 months after the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, opened the borders to the free and unfettered movement of goods and money. This is also when our corporations, our manufacturing plants, our extractive industries, our monoculture agricultural concerns were incentivized to go south in search of low wages, no environmental protections, and low to no taxation. It is also when the State Department, and this is documented, realized that that would cause human displacement and drive northward migration. So prevention through deterrence began, kicked off by a militarized mission called Operation Gatekeeper, which continued the process of sealing the southern border to people. A process that did not begin with Biden. Oh no. It began in the 1880s with the Chinese Exclusion Act. It was concretized in the 1920s with the birth of the Border Patrol. It was accelerated in the latter decades of the 20th century with border externalization efforts, as well as Operation Gatekeeper. It became supercharged after 9/11 with the so-called War on Terror, and is now policy under Trump and co. But all prevention through deterrence has ever done is exact tremendous misery and harm. Untold numbers of peace-seeking people have died or disappeared because of it. Prevention through deterrence is an abject failure, a deadly, destructive policy that has and can never work. Why? Because for as long as there have been people on this planet, we have moved. It is part of our human story. Most of us here are immigrants, right? Unless you come from indigenous roots, and in some cases even then, todos somos migrantes. Unless your ancestors were kidnapped and brought here across the Middle Passage in chains, todos somos migrantes. Your people probably moved to flee harm, horror, or hunger, or maybe they just moved toward better, because that's what we do. We move toward better. We move toward opportunity, as I have been allowed to do for the whole of my career. And I know all of this sounds dire, and it is, particularly now that the very folks who tried to make family separation official U.S. policy are back in the White House, particularly now that the regime intent on systematically imprisoning and expelling millions of people who live, study, worship, and work beside us every day is now back in the White House. But in the world of the border industrial complex, I also found hope. I found hope in the mentors and guides you will read in the pages of my book, if you do read it, and I hope you will. They represent the myriad helpers all across the line, all over the U.S., right here in this room, who've been willing to stand up for humanity in the face of what truly is a manufactured crisis, a crisis 100% made in the U.S., a crisis that deliberately traps the world's most vulnerable people, borrowing the UN's terms, in some of the most dangerous places on earth, where they are preyed upon by organized crime. Bad actors who responded to a market opportunity created by our walls, whether physical, technological, bureaucratic, or military. Indeed, I conclude in my book that the real crisis we face today is not the number of people striving to move northward or to stay right here where they've put down roots, made careers, and started families, the place they call home. Rather, the real crisis is the hardening of the human heart against their hope for better. Because what we should be asking, what we should have been asking for decades is, why are so many people on the run? And interrogating that and taking responsibility for the role that we play as a nation. For these are the same forces that are now strangling our planet to death. Instead, all our government has chosen to ask these many decades is, how do we stop them? It is time we all accept and understand that folks who've had to pull up stakes and run did not do so because they want to. Nobody wants to leave their family, their language, their community, all that they've ever known if they don't have to. It's the rare bird who does, and I'm one of them. No mother wants to put her daughter on the back of La Bestia, the freight train that runs through Mexico with a morning after pill in her pocket, knowing she will be raped. No family wants to set sail across the Caribbean Sea in a dinghy. They do so because the ocean is safer than the land. No father wants to place his beloved child in the hands of a coyote, hoping he or she will make it safely across an increasingly walled-off Sonoran desert in 100-plus-degree heat. No person wants to scale a wall blisteringly hot of steel bollards now climbing to 30 feet, knowing they might endure broken bones or traumatic brain injury or death if they tumble over the other side. Folks are pulling up stakes and running, even into such dangers, because their homes have been turned into the mouths of sharks, in large part due to our foreign and economic policies, dating back decades and centuries, as far back as the Monroe Doctrine, as far back as the settler colonial ideology that is manifest destiny. They do so because their hope for better knows no borders. And our cruelty in the face of that hope is not okay. So what I learned while researching this book is that the borderlands are everywhere, not just in the Southwest. The militarization of our borderlands did not begin with 9/11. That was just the excuse. Nor is the system broken, as pundits and politicians would have us believe. It is working just fine for the demagogues and profiteers who benefit from it, which is why we've seen no human-centered reform to this system in almost 4 decades. We live in a divided nation. It has become harder and harder to reason with those standing on the other side. But here's where I have found agreement, even with the most hardened of hearts. Everyone can agree the cruelty is not okay. The cruelty is trouncing all our values as members of a democratic society, as communities of faith, as communities willing to bear witness. It is an infrastructure that was already in place when Trump and co. took over the White House the first time. They tried to unleash it then, but were largely thwarted by the courts and their own ineptitude. This time around, however, they know what they're doing. And unfortunately, we have been here before. We also have overcome before, and we will overcome again. Bull Connor is back. George Wallace is back. Hitler and Mao and Pol Pot and Stalin, they're all back. Evil walks the earth once more, this time in the form of Donald Trump and Stephen Miller and Thomas Homan and Kristi Noem and Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio and Russell Vogt and Pam Bondi and so many others. They are the worst of the worst. And their cruelty is not okay. So how do we deal with it? It will take all of us, standing together and strong, throwing ourselves into the gears of this machinery of misery like a billion tiny grains of sand, jamming up the gears to keep them from turning until these dark days are behind us. Because they will end. They always do. And when they do, we must be ready to build a better nation from the ashes. How do we do this? I find inspiration in the 10 steps to freedom and power espoused by Stacey Abrams. Her 10-step campaign implores us to commit, share, organize in ways both big and small, mobilize, litigate, disrupt, deny them the authority they claim, engage, elect, and finally, to demand all our birthright to safety and dignity and due process under the law. It's going to take all of us right now, all over the nation, each person playing their single small part, emulating the helpers already in our midst, who you're about to hear from as I am coming to an end, to jam the gears as we simultaneously grow a large choir singing loud and in glorious harmony, "This is not the nation we wish to be. This is not the nation we believe ourselves to be. We are better than the result of the last election. We do not want to be associated with the indignity and deliberate cruelty of an immigration system that has become the dagger plunged into the heart of our democracy." So my book, Crossing the Line, is an expose. It is a call to action, but it is also a celebration of the good work being done by so many on behalf of human rights and civil liberties and peace and justice. It is a manual for a movement for just migration and an invitation to folks everywhere to join the choir of resistance if you haven't already. As you hear from the 100 or so voices in my book, I urge you to remain aware of the one example that makes your heart beat a little faster, and then choose to do just that. Whether it means writing a book, or making art, or bothering your elected officials, accompanying folks to ICE check-ins, offering your time to visit inmates in a prison camp near you, and there is one near you, feeding people, clothing people, teaching people, providing pro bono legal support, harboring them if it comes to that, doing Know Your Rights trainings, passing out red cards, acting as a citizen bystander, joining a rapid response network, running for political office. The list goes on and on and on. And folks with us here tonight are going to give you some good ideas. The point is, if each and every one of us chooses to do just one thing, our collective collaboration will provide the bulwark we're going to need to get through these next several years. And let's hope there are as few years as possible. Because when this dark chapter is finally behind us, it will be up to us, as it was during the family separation crisis of 2018, to lead in recreating the nation we wish to be. A place where diversity, equality, and inclusion are celebrated. A place characterized by peace, justice, and human rights for all. A true exemplar of freedom and a beacon of hope for all those the world over striving to live free, including right here in these United States of America. Thank you. So I'm going to pass the mic to folks from, well, you guys decide who's going to go first and let me know, and I'll call you out. But before I give it up, one tip that I've gotten while on the road is that everybody's outraged, everybody's stunned and confused and doesn't know what to do. What we need to do is to invite them in. So I've made these postcards for you to take as many or as few as you want, or none if you don't care to, and invite somebody to join the movement, either by reading my book or joining one of the organizations right here in our midst. We have to invite people in to grow the choir to the size it needs to be that bulwark we're going to need against this terrible regime. Come on up. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Great.
Cheers.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Sweet. I'm the executive director of the MIRA Coalition, or the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. And it's really a pleasure to be here and hear these amazing remarks from Sarah, and hopefully just share a couple of options of some ways that you can get involved here locally. If anyone does not know MIRA, we are a coalition. We number more than 150 member organizations across Massachusetts, organizations that are serving immigrants, that are organizing immigrants, that relate so many different ways to immigrants, but who come together because we are shared in the vision of wanting to advocate for immigrant communities across the Commonwealth. And we do a lot. We do a lot of state advocacy, of course, but MIRA also offers quite a number of different programs. So I thought it's worth just talking about a few of those and then some ways that you all can get involved if you're interested. So one program that feels especially relevant to talk about in the climate that we're in right now is that this past year, one of the biggest demands for our work has been for Know Your Rights information. Folks, no matter who you are, immigrant or non-immigrant, we all should be educated on our rights right now. Our rights in interacting with law enforcement, our rights if we're encountering ICE. And so MIRA has been doing pretty much nonstop Know Your Rights trainings. If you've been to one already, fantastic. We have tons of incredible resources that our training team has made up on our website. And so if you are interested in hosting Know Your Rights presentations or just sharing out resources, you can probably find them in our webpage. We have Know Your Rights materials available for educators, especially right now, a lot of back to school materials. We have Know Your Rights information for businesses and employers who are thinking about what happens in their workplace. We have Know Your Rights information for healthcare providers about what happens if ICE is interacting in healthcare environments. And we also do tons of other kinds of training in addition to the Know Your Rights, a lot of Immigration Law 101 kind of information, and a lot of information for providers who are providing different kinds of services to populations that might include immigrants and want to better understand immigrant eligibility right now, what's happening and how this landscape is changing the reality for the folks that you're serving. So if you are interested in any training, you can reach out to MIRA, and we have a terrific training team. But especially the Know Your Rights materials. There's tons of resources available on our website. You can download webinars and YouTubes, right, that do a training, or you can request a live training to be brought out to your group, whoever that is. We also operate, and this is relatively new for us, about a year and a half, we've been operating an immigration helpline. We're really proud of this because we know that immigration is such a complicated space, and so there are so many folks who have questions and uncertainties, and so they're able to call our helpline, and we do sort of general questions about how someone might navigate through the processes and then get connected to resources. And what's important to us about this, much like the resources, is that there's a lot of myths and just false information out there about immigrants and immigration issues. And so MIRA really tries to do our best to provide reliable, factual, vetted information that people can count on. And so if you know of folks who need that kind of information, please do encourage them to be connecting to us for trainings or our helpline. We have over the last year, fielded well over 1,000 calls, many of which, of course, are from directly impacted individuals. And then I mentioned advocacy, and for us, that's really the center of what we do at MIRA. I also love the metaphor that Sarah used of, thinking about like all the grains of sand that we can throw into this machinery. And there are quite a few, right? The reality is, even though immigration is a federal issue, and what we're really focused on right now is state level advocacy, because that's where we think we have some hope of passing some policies. The reality is there are some things we can do at the state level that could impact the federal, right? And so some of the big things we're advocating for as MIRA Coalition this year are around how our state and local police interact or don't with ICE, right? And, we're advocating very strongly that our state and local police should not be collaborating with ICE, formally or informally. They should not be asking for immigration status of people that they interact with in the community, right? And so we're pushing for bills that would put this into law here in Massachusetts. In a lot of cities, Boston being one of them, we have a Trust Act. A lot of people are really proud that we have that Trust Act. It has these kinds of policies made the law for here in Boston, but it's not the case across the entire state. And so our goal is to get bills passed that would make this the law here in Massachusetts. So at least we can control what we control, that our state and local police aren't contributing to these issues. We have launched a campaign this year that we're really proud of, which is lifting up the need for immigration legal services. The reality is that so many individuals among us who are arrested are going to go through some kind of court proceeding. Right now, they do so without the right to a government-paid attorney. And the statistics show that if someone is in detention and they have they have an attorney with them, they are 10 times more likely to be successful in winning their case to remain here. Without an attorney, the chances are incredibly slim, and it really is such an uphill battle. And it makes sense, right? You think about going into a court proceeding on your own and trying to defend yourself, in any proceeding. It doesn't even matter what it is, how you learn the laws, how you know what evidence to bring forward. And then imagine having to navigate all of that, sometimes, in your second or third language, and in an incredibly different cultural context. So people need attorneys. They need attorneys to have a fair chance. And so we've been advocating for the Immigrant Legal Defense Act. It's a bill that we introduced this year in Massachusetts. And it would, if enacted, would set up sort of a full representation program for low-income immigrants who can't afford counsel to get them government-paid counsel. And we've already managed to secure this year, this is like my bright spot this year, we actually got an allocation of state funding of $5 million from our state house for this year, which is a huge amount of money in terms of how many people will be impacted and how many people will get counsel and have that that support as they go through the immigration proceedings. That program is just getting stood up right now, but we want to make this permanent and a permanent thing that people here in Massachusetts can count on. So that's one of our advocacy asks right now. So Sarah talked about Stacey Abrams having 10 ways that people can get involved. I'm just giving you 4 because I'm not as creative as Stacey Abrams. One of mine, of course, is I already spoke about Know Your Rights presentations. And the reality is for every single, workforce, childcare space, church or synagogue or mosque, like every space that we're in should be educated on their rights and should be putting plans into place. And so whoever you're connected with, it's worth thinking about, could they benefit from doing more thinking about what to do if ICE were to come to this space. So that's one thing. Think about, do I know anyone who could benefit from that Know Your Rights type material? Second, of course, is right now especially, I think there's such an incredible sense of so much fear and terror in immigrant communities. And so just showing up and, showing that you stand with immigrant communities, that you are in solidarity with them, really matters. And this is not something I was talking about a year or two ago, but I think in this climate now, it really matters. It matters to go patronize your local businesses that are immigrant owned, right? To put a sign in your window that says, like, I support immigrants. Like, the more visible ways that you can to show that you are an ally and that you are standing with folks, it matters. Of course, I would not be a good steward of MIRA and our incredible coalition partners if I did not say to donate. The reality is that all of these organizations, whether it's my organization, the next folks who are going to speak, or, all of the incredible organizations that work with immigrants right now, we're all struggling. It's a really tough time. And the reality is your funds help us and your time and volunteer efforts help us even more. And so consider finding a place that you can get involved. There are so many. Again, you're going to hear from a couple of other great folks in a minute. But, if you live in a certain part of the state, et cetera, MIRA Coalition, if you go to our website, miracoalition.org, we have a list of our member organizations of that 150 organizations I mentioned. And again, any one of them would be delighted to see, your support for them in whatever way you can. If you are interested in getting involved with MIRA, we do accept volunteers a number of ways. One example is that we regularly have citizenship clinics where we help folks apply for citizenship who've been here with their green card for many years. We also do voter registration with folks once they actually become citizens. And we have lots of other volunteer opportunities that you can find on our website. And then last, but definitely not least, my favorite plug to make is also join us in advocacy. It is easy to do. There are so many simple things you can do to show your support. If you thought the bills that I just spoke about sound compelling and important, you can go to our website and, there are links just to send a letter to your state reps and senators and show your support for that. It takes 5 minutes and it adds up and really means something. And if you're interested in more advocacy, you can, reach out to us through our website or talk to my colleague Dawn, who is waving her hands and is very friendly. And she will happily get you signed up to get more information from us. So again, please consider, getting connected to Know Your Rights materials, supporting and just standing together with immigrants right now, donating of your time or resources, or joining with us to advocate. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jaya Savita. I'm the executive director of the Asian Pacific Islanders Civic Action Network. We are one of the co-founding organizations, or one of the organizations that helped to create the LUCE Immigration Justice Network. And I'm here with Kevin Lam, who can introduce themselves. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Kevin Lam. I use he or they pronouns. I'm the co-executive director with the Asian American Resource Workshop, ARW. And yeah, with APIs Can, we're one of the co-founding, co-creating organizations that really formed the LUCE Immigration Justice Network back in earlier of this year, which we'll share more about.
And as I set up tech, I wanted to invite folks to do some movement. I know we've been seated, and it is 7:37. And so I'm imagining that there's some sleepiness happening because I'm definitely feeling that. Yes. So let's reach our hands up. If you are not too close to your neighbor, maybe push the air down. If you're close to a neighbor, stagger or find your own way to do such pushing. Maybe shrug your shoulders up, push them down. We can roll our wrists, maybe wiggle our hips a little. You can shake your feet, but just want to encourage folks to stretch a bit. And I'm going to start the process of screen sharing very shortly. Yes. Share. Amazing. Can you all see the screen? Beautiful. Even better. That's a little scary. Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Like we said, we're going to be doing a bit of a political education teach-in today. We're two organizations that make up the larger LUCE network, and we'll introduce our organizations as well as LUCE. So the Asian Pacific Islanders Civic Action Network, or APIs Can, is a statewide coalition of working class and AAPI serving organizations from across Massachusetts. Our mission is rooted in a commitment towards racial and wealth equity of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, while representing a Pan-Asian perspective and working to build Pan-Asian solidarity. Over the past, actually 9 years, we're going to be entering our 10th year next year. The coalition has had significant wins, advancing progressive policies and working on the ground with partners to counter rising anti-Asian hate and rising anti-immigration hate. I'll pass it over to Kevin.
So a little bit more about the Asian American Resource Workshop. We are a community-based organization that was founded in 1979. We're a political home for the Pan-Asian community across the greater Boston area. And ARW, we are a member-led organization really committed to building grassroots power through political education, creative expression, and issue-based and neighborhood organizing. Right now, we're really doing that through an anti-displacement framework. So our core issues being around addressing housing justice and immigration deportation defense work. And for context, ARW, we started doing our work explicitly around immigration deportation under the first Trump administration. We are the only base building organization in the state that explicitly works with Southeast Asian refugees with criminal records who are facing deportation. And we're based in Dorchester.
And then to introduce LUCE, so LUCE came about really after an action, or in the lead up to an action that initially was being planned by ARW for a impacted community member, but then with the Trump election in November, ARW's leadership reached out to groups like APIs Can, Bijan, which was mentioned, FJA, which is Families for Justice is Healing, the UU Mass Action Organization, and Homes for All, to organize really a solidarity, a moment for solidarity in December, focusing in on the intersections of the immigration crisis, what we knew was going to come in a Trump 2.0 administration based on Project 2025, and then a broader kind of visionary idea that where Massachusetts has historically been a place of a lot of racial segregation, despite moments of history of racial solidarity, bringing together a space for a intersectional immigrant-led and immigrant justice coalition committed to the ideals of grassroots organizing that is led by and focused on impacted community. And so from that moment and following the first of its kind statewide convening in January, LUCE was born. So LUCE is a coalition of immigrant-led and grassroots organizations committed to building people power for everyone across the state. We organize in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, immigrants, and refugees, people who are targets of criminalization, young folks, elders, LGBTQ folks, and those who are oppressed and living at the margins due to the broken justice system within the U.S. And listed below is our steering committee members. They make up organizations from across the state, including ARW, API's CAN, BIJAN, which is the Boston Immigrant Justice Accompaniment Network, the Brazilian Women's Group, Essex County Community Organization, Homes for All Massachusetts, Mata Hari, Mujeres Victoriosas, Muslim Justice League, Nube, Neighbor to Neighbor, and UU Mass Action. Okay, so we're going to be getting into some more heavy stuff, but I really want to shout out to Sarah for doing some excellent priming. I was texting Kevin that I want to start using the border industrial complex because that's such a good term to use to define a lot of the work that our groups focus on, especially at the intersections of the immigration, deportation, and carceral systems. So I'll pass it to Kevin.
Yeah, so I think for us, when we're talking about crimmigration, just to like define some terms and clarity and build some alignment, right? So the ways in which we define immigrant is a person who moves away from their place of usual residence, whether within a country or across an international border, temporarily or permanently, and for a variety of different reasons. Right. And so I think that is really important to name, I think, both around like understanding immigrant as an umbrella term and also the nuances within the immigration system and just how folks have different statuses and that impacts how they interact with the system. The other term, which some folks may know, some folks are like, this is the first time I'm hearing about it, is actually ARW, API's CAN, and through the LUCE network, we really frame our approach to immigrant justice through crimmigration. And what that means is the intersection of criminal law and the criminal legal system and the immigration system, and the ways in which this has really refers to the increasing of resort to criminalization and quasi-criminalization as a way of disciplining, excluding, and expelling migrants or those seen as unentitled, right? And so for us, we've seen the ways in which folks have been funneled from the prison to deportation pipeline and the ways in which these two systems actually function together.
And two more terms, the deterrence-based policies Sarah touched on. They're policies that aim to stop migrants from reaching the U.S. border. These policies have increasingly defined the government's approach to migration and asylum, and has been the policy in many ways since the founding of the country. And then abolition is the vision that LUCE, ARW, and API's CAN is really guided by. It's a political vision and organizing strategy focused on dismantling the prison industrial complex and building a new society focused on care, accountability, and addressing harm without relying on punishment or violence. This definition comes from Mariam Makaba, who's an excellent and incredible abolitionist theorist and really focuses on the intersection of academia and social justice and abolitionist vision. Abolition is not just about eliminating prisons and policing, but it's also about transforming the systems and the structures that perpetuate oppression and inequality and inequity. Abolition is proactive, it's imaginative, and it involves both tearing down harmful systems and building alternatives based on collective well-being. And I think that is a really critical sentence, especially when we think about the ways in which people will often say, so what's going to happen when the police are gone? Like, what happens tomorrow if there are no more cops? And it's really about imagining alternatives to the current systems, because we're living in a society right now where what it is, right, or what's happening now is perceived as what it only can ever be. And we know that that things like this, systems of inequity and visions for better futures are very fluid and can be manifested even if what we're seeing right now is terrible. And I think that's an important thing to remind ourselves, especially in this crisis.
Yeah, so I think just to ground us in like Massachusetts and the impacts around immigration on Asian communities, right? I think the one thing that I think for us, LUCE wants to really also uplift, and APIs can and AirW in our work in engaging Asian communities is, for decades, we are continuing to counter these dominant narratives that live within our immigrant justice organizing of, right, immigration is often seen as a Latina issue, and that Black and Asian immigrants are often left out of the conversation. And so I think for us, what felt really important to ground in Massachusetts is that when we look at the history of the state, that API communities are also impacted, right? So for AirW, in our work around Southeast Asian deportation, we understand Massachusetts as being one of the original sites for Southeast Asian refugee resettlements. And so places like Revere, Boston, and then due to rising rent, folks had to relocate to neighborhoods like Lowell, Lynn, Dorchester. And it's continued to be a home to Southeast Asian refugee and immigrant communities in this time. And Lowell is home to the second largest Cambodian population in the United States. And Dorchester is actually home to a large Vietnamese refugee and immigrant community that came to the US after the war in Southeast Asia. And that when we talk about the undocumented population, a third of the undocumented population I actually also identify as Asian. And so those are some of the things that we want to uplift around what does it mean for us to reimagine our immigrant justice movement that also brings in communities that are often left in the margins and also can actually be a voice in reshaping what our immigrant justice looks like and the ways in which we want to live.
So I know that Sarah talked about this to an extent, but we're just going to go over kind of a quick history of detention, prisons, and privatization. So the origins of detention and prison, more grounded in the immigration process, began in the late 19th and early 20th century, focusing on ports like Ellis Island in New York and Angel Island in California. And detentions expanded during wartime. So one of the largest and, unfortunately least discussed, at least in schools, would be the Japanese internment during World War II. We also then, starting in the 20th century, saw the rise of mass incarceration as the primary policy of the government. So from the 1970s onwards, tough on crime policies caused the U.S. Prison population to skyrocket, and immigration enforcement increased dramatically post-1990 with stricter laws being established. Starting in the 80s, we saw the growth of private prisons with companies emerging and really the foundation of the private prison industrial complex. By 2010, about 80% of ICE detainees were held in private or contract facilities, meaning private prisons. You might recognize names like Core Civic and Geo Group, which are profit or corporations that profit from the detention and incarceration of immigrant, people of color, Black folks. There, of course, have been controversies and criticisms of private prisons due to poor conditions, lack of oversight, motive driving incarceration. And while there have been recent efforts to reduce private contracts and pushing for decarceration, clearly what we're seeing today, especially with Governor Healey's efforts to create a new women's prison in the state for $360 million when there isn't enough money for public schools, is clear that even in progressive bastions like Massachusetts, the value of prisons still outweighs the value of our people.
Yeah, so some of this that we want to also uplift, as Jaya shared, just again, like the local context of immigration detentions, deportations, private prisons. So, for historical context around East Boston Immigration Station, World War II having detention of quote unquote enemy aliens, right? And then for local enforcement and ICE contracts, as was mentioned, around these 287G agreements, they existed in counties like Bristol, Plymouth, Barnstable, meaning that the state, or Massachusetts, was partnering with the federal government to host immigration detainees. And those eventually ended in 2023 in all county jails. And the only standing 287G agreement right now in Massachusetts is through the Department of Corrections. And this piece that Jaya named around like private prisons and regional facilities, there aren't any private ICE prisons right now in Massachusetts, but that we're neighbors to Rhode Island. And so what ends up happening is that if Plymouth County Detention is overfilled, a lot of our folks are then transferred to Wyatt Detention Center in Rhode Island, which is a publicly owned but privately operated detention facility. And then nationwide, about 90% of ICE detainees are actually held in private facilities.
Yeah, and you do Southeast Asian. So we want to just like quickly, and of course this is like a very quick download of the history of Latinx deportation, starting only really in the 20th century. But during the late 1920s and 1930s, large-scale repatriation campaigns were enacted to forcibly remove millions of Mexicans from the United States, many of whom were U.S. citizens. And, you know, this comes about 50 to 60 years after, or about, I want to say 50 to 60 years after the Spanish-American or the U.S.-Mexican War, which established the very arbitrary border between Mexico and the United States, including the annexation of Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, etc. In the 1950s, militarized operations targeted Mexican migrants. This was formally named Operation Wetback, which is where the slur comes from, resulting in the deportation of over 1 million people, most of whom who had come to the U.S., quote unquote, legally. With the start of the Reagan administration's war on drugs and racist policies in the 1980s, immigration detention of Latinx migrants intensified. And in 1996, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act, the IRA, which also impacted API immigrants, broadened the definition of an aggravated felony and made them deportable offenses with no hope of return. And these were applied retroactively, meaning people served their time in a messed up system, but then could still be forced to be deported. Starting in 2000, enhanced cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities led to the increases in deportations. And then between 2014 and 2017, family detention centers were reinstated and the deportation numbers surged, with millions, mostly Latinos, removed under these enforcement efforts.
So we know this is very fast and a lot, but I think for us just felt like this was actually really important to ground around the ways in which we actually need to approach our immigrant justice organizing in this current political moment in a different way. And so the other piece that we wanted to uplift, as Jaya was sharing around some of that history for the Latina community, a lot of that actually parallels what the Southeast Asian community has experienced. And so I think for us, the political edit is really important to understand how is there like linkage between the different communities and the ways in which those policies have really impacted our folks. So some of the history of Southeast Asian deportations, to let folks know, Southeast Asian Americans are actually the largest refugee community to have been resettled to the U.S., right? And this is a product of the American war in Southeast Asia because of U.S. military intervention through carpet bombings and chemical warfare, displaced a lot of the Southeast Asian community from Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And because of the failed refugee resettlement program, as Southeast Asian refugees were resettled to the U.S., there was actually a lack of U.S. government support, a lack of structural support, and that resulted in a lot of systemic violence for the refugee community, which put a lot of Southeast Asian young people, many who were born in refugee camps, their families experiencing war and trauma, having to make really difficult choices of what does it mean to try to like survive in a new country and also care for my family. And that often sometimes led folks to find community through quote unquote the form of gangs, as folks were experiencing heightened violence through anti-Asian sentiment during that time. And that for court hearings, because folks were now funneled into the prison system, many Southeast Asian community members accepted plea deals without knowing about the immigration consequences that triggered their deportation. And that, what Shreya shared around the immigration laws in 1996, that was also applied to Southeast Asian refugees. So when you understand the refugee experience of Southeast Asian folks coming to the US because of a US war that was exacerbated, the very same country that took Southeast Asian refugees in is the same country that is also actively deporting the community. And that deportations for the Southeast Asian refugee community actually spiked under the first Trump administration, but really happened under Bush, under Obama, under Biden, but even for the first Trump administration, Cambodian deportations during that time spiked to 279%.
And I just want to say that even in the past 2 weeks, ARW has had 7 community members taken. So we are seeing these attacks on our communities repeating across the state and across the country. And what we want to highlight in this conversation is to not downplay the impact and harm that this is having on the Latina community, but to really name that this is also impacting APIs. This is also impacting Black immigrants, because we are communities that are here as refugees, as TPS holders, and who have experienced firsthand the failures of the government's supposed help and support in making this country our home as well. So I'm gonna, do we want to go through this? Okay, we're gonna skip some slides. Yep, there's a lot of content, but we're just gonna jump right into Trump 2.0. So I don't know if our time can take it, is the only thing. But what we wanted to talk about is in the context of Trump 2.0. I think this government has operated on fear being its primary mode, so making us scared and therefore not totally sure what's happening. So Trump 2.0 has really been the mass deportation agenda. This was outlined in Project 2025, and for the most part has been, pretty well followed to a T. Key policies include executive orders to limit asylum and defund sanctuary cities. We're seeing the consequences here in Boston with attacks on Michelle Wu, as well as threats to bring National Guard to this state, which so far hasn't happened in large part because we have a mostly blue mayors across the state and a Democratic governor. What we're seeing now is efforts to send National Guard to more conservative-led states because they're less likely to be upset about it. We've also seen efforts to end birthright citizenship, which was fortunately blocked. And then executive orders to end refugees, as well as CHNV Pearl, which I forgot what the abbreviation is. Right. Yes. So the Pearl program. And as Sarah talked about, wall construction has resumed and is getting much larger and taller. And expanded enforcement through the big, beautiful bill. So Massachusetts has faced, a surge of ICE agents, a surge of just federal agents in general, and we've seen pretty blatant collaboration between local PD and federal agents, even in cities, counties, municipalities where there are trust agreements or where there are sanctuary policies. We know that there's about a goal for 1 million deportations per year. As Sarah talked about, the Everglades Detention Center, which is heartbreaking that it's in the home of one of our last Everglade parks, are one of the most critical from a conservation standpoint, resource that's being used to literally house immigrants. And bond hearings are being denied, and we're experiencing the consequences. There's retroactive expedited removals. Civil rights groups are being sued. We're experiencing humanitarian and legal crises and the suppression of free speech. And so, those are consequences that we are all feeling. But in this context, like, education is power. So knowing what's happening is really critical. It's not just meant to spiral us into stress and sadness. And just to kind of ground us in what we can do, we're working to build community and take action that represents our values. So we know that API and Black communities are being harmed, and Latino communities are being harmed and targeted in Boston, Massachusetts. Deportation and criminalization are tied together. The infrastructure works together to oppress all of our communities. And kind of woven throughout this whole narrative is the good versus bad immigrant narrative, which has been used to weaken our movement and to really ground in this idea of the good immigrant who follows the rules and the bad immigrant who is criminal and therefore unworthy of state support, of protection, of the right to thrive and to live. And we're going to just do a little bit of the current landscape. Apologies, this is a lot of information.
Yeah, so I think folks have been witnessing it on the ground, seeing it right under the second Trump administration around what they're calling Operation Patriot 2.0, which is the second surge of ICE enforcement that was really focused on Massachusetts and still really prevalent and here. What we've seen through the LUCE network is, right, like through that formation, when the statewide formation came to be, part of that balance was like, how do we respond to the current moment around crisis and also do the visionary building that we know is needed for the immigrant justice movement that builds across movement issues and sectors? Because quite honestly, the immigrant justice movement has failed a lot of our communities, has failed a lot of immigrant communities who have been left out of the conversation and continue to be thrown under the bus when it has come to policy wins, come to what does it mean to really support folks who've been incarcerated and impacted in those ways as well. And so we saw a spike in the LUCE hotline that was created that was reporting ICE presence across the state through our hubs and verifiers going out to really support communities on the ground. Because of the surge, we've seen an overcrowding of detention facilities, leading to actually folks being held at the Burlington field office, which is not a place in which people is not set up actually for people to be held. And they're held on days, sometimes being denied access to medical care, access to food, and just the conditions in there are not suitable actually at all. And that because of the overflow of detentions and ICE enforcement, we are seeing community members, loved ones in Massachusetts who are being detained, being quickly transferred out of state to places like Wyatt in Rhode Island, Stratford County in New Hampshire, and even Batavia, New York. These are all different detention facilities in which folks, at least in our experience in Massachusetts, have been transferred to because Plymouth is at capacity and over capacity. And that, yeah, a lot of our community members are being denied their medical attention and medical care. This includes a lot of ARW's own community members who were just detained over the last month within a week, 2 week span, where we have had to advocate for folks to get the medical care and attention they need because it is a life or death situation if some of them are not able to have access to their medicine. And that in this climate, the new terrain that we're grappling is actually a lot of our own community is grappling and asking about what does the process of self-deportation look like under this political climate because of the fear of third country removals. And so what we're starting to see is some resignation of what does it mean for me to self-deport to a country in which I might have some familiarity to, in order to prevent any third country removal and being detained there for however long.
And then just more of an update, a large part of, this is a pretty upsetting operation that was launched last week. But a large part of what LUCE is doing is really to both verify accurate information, but also to confirm and then publicize when there are instances of mis or disinformation. Because a lot of, again, what we're operating under is this position of constant fear, which creates chaos, a lack of trust, and the spreading of inaccurate information, whether well-intentioned or malintentioned. And so ICE reportedly launched Operation Freaky Friday on Friday of last Friday, which will target children age 14 and older who came to the U.S. without a parent or legal guardian. We received this intel from the American Immigration Attorneys of America. However, we don't have deeper information on like the specifics of the policy yet. And so just because this has been talked about in the news a lot, I just wanted to make sure we focused a little bit on this. The general gist of what we received is that immigrants who are older than 14 who came to the U.S. as unaccompanied minors or were in ORR custody, which is the standard practice for unaccompanied children, will be sent a letter from ICE threatening indefinite detention if they do not waive certain protections and withdraw immigration applications. Children may be offered $2,500 to voluntarily return to their countries of origin, and there may be additional threatening language in the letter as well. However, we do not know if this offer will be genuine, and the government may or may not honor any payments. The other concerns that are being raised kind of with this operation is just the way in which this feeds the ongoing human trafficking crisis that is a global issue, and the ways in which the U.S. government passively and actively participates in this system, particularly through mechanisms like this. But again, we're going to be trying to make sure we get accurate information about this so that families don't get unnecessarily stressed or concerned, because what we understand is that a letter will be sent, and it's critical that families review that with a lawyer to make sure it's real. We've also been hearing about a lot of hoaxes and fraudulent kind of coercive tactics being used by just bad actors. But yeah, I mean, I think this kind of speaks to the fact that we keep waiting for the crisis to happen, but the crisis is kind of already here. And the best way to fight that is to really come together in spaces like this, to learn and to understand where resources are, how to share resources, how to use your privilege to support those that are marginalized, and how to share information with folks. So just going to go into next steps. This is less heavy, more fun. So you can find resources and join us. I forgot to put the LUCE link in, but it's lucemass.org. You can join Mass APIs Can at massapiscan.org or ARW at arw.org. Follow us on Instagram for updates. I think we have both now left Twitter. APIs, we still have Twitter, but we're not using it. Yes. And then donate to support the movement. We encourage you to donate to APIs Can, to ARW, to the steering committee groups that represent LUCE, because right now what we're finding is mutual aid is the critical need. So ARW has actually launched a mutual aid fund. Do you want to talk about it? Okay.
Yeah, so AirW, because we started doing this work in 2017, we were able to really, and at that time we were honestly a team of 2-3 people. We're a team of 7 right now, right? And still pretty small, but I think, what we noticed during the first Trump admin was we were able to be really nimble and respond to the level of detentions and deportations that were happening and organize around individual cases. What we are seeing in the second the second Trump administration is we are in new political terrain, and the organizing that we have to do needs to look different. And so part of this mutual aid fund is really to support a community defense fund for the broader Southeast Asian refugee immigrant community that is explicitly being targeted for detentions and deportations. And this is both from us, again, being the only base building organization in the state that's explicitly working with this population and community, and the ways in which in the first Trump administration, we were going to different organizations, we were talking to different lawyers, and the stigma of a lot of our community members being formally incarcerated, having a criminal record, they were being told no. We were being told no, that we can't help your people. And so for us in this next period, this defense fund is actually to support folks in detention, to support folks who've been deported, and also to support the loved ones who are kind of trying to rebuild and just restabilize after a loved one's been ripped apart by ICE violence. And so we launched this mutual aid defense fund to really support Southeast Asian communities in the state.
And I'm going to go to the next slide. So the piece with LUCE, volunteers are desperately needed. If you have signed up already, be patient. Someone will be in touch with you. But we really need hotline operators. Right now, we're dealing with a fair amount of burnout from existing volunteer operators. And so even if you don't speak any other language other than English, but especially if you speak other languages, please consider volunteering. You can go to lucemass.org to sign the form, fill out your information, and you'll be someone will reach out to you to do kind of a onboarding check-in kind of conversation. And you can volunteer. Your schedule can be somewhat flexible. It's mostly just about having more people available to tap, because the work is heavy, the work is hard, but it's really critical that we have more folks able to answer phone calls. And stay in touch. So take down our emails. I love Canva, so I got a little carried away. But yeah, stay in touch with us. We are here based in Boston, and are eager to engage. We're also collecting signatures to get rent control on the ballot, which is not connected to this in theory, but is connected because housing is a human right. So highly encourage, if you are a Massachusetts voter, even if you don't live in Boston, if you live anywhere in the state and are a voter here, please consider signing on as we continue to work to collect signatures by November 10th. So thank you so much.
You might want to hear about, I'll try and entice people to say, as I am a Burlington resident, and as many of you may know, Burlington is ICE headquarters for not just Massachusetts and the Boston area, but for all of New England. And they put it next to the Burlington Mall. Yeah, I'll speak right into the mic for you. Really, when you go to vigil, to resist, to protest at ICE headquarters, you park in the Macy's overflow and walk across the street. And this is in a progressive community. It did not vote for Trump. Trump lost Burlington by, I think it's 17 or 18 points. Now, ICE put it there back in 2007. ICE wasn't good back then either, but it wasn't this current iteration. They were not using it as a detention facility, as our last speakers just said. In fact, they promised specifically not to. But this is a facility where they're making people sleep on cement floors. Many of you may have heard of Marcelo da Silva, the volleyball player who got grabbed by ICE on his way to practice. Apparently, he was a great citizen. His coach said he's a wonderful person. The police had no interactions with him. That ICE wasn't looking for him. They just pulled over a car and they're grabbing people. They made him sleep on the cement floor for 6 days at that Burlington facility. So right in a progressive community, an incredibly regressive institution is. All right, so that was my sell not to walk out just yet. My name is Brian Garvey. I'm the executive director of Massachusetts Peace Action. We're the largest peace organization in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have 2,400 members, 20,000 supporters across the Commonwealth, and what we're talking about is a peace issue. For many of the reasons that the last speakers just said, the United States, its endless wars in the Middle East, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, have created what Juan Gonzalez, who you may know as Amy Goodman's co-host on Democracy Now! In his book titled The Harvest of Empire. Right? When you destroy countries abroad, people flee, and they often come to the countries responsible for that destruction. In our case, the United States. right? This is a peace issue for that broad reason, but also because our cruel immigration policy is violence against our neighbors. It means that people are afraid to leave their homes. People are afraid to go to work. People are afraid to drop their kids off at school. People are afraid to go to churches and houses of worship. I was just before this at a protest at Boston Consulting Group at the seaport, trying to highlight their role in the genocide in Gaza, which they're responsible for. And that's connected to ICE too, because the Trump administration has weaponized ICE against peace activists, especially students. If you don't know of the case of Rumeysa Ozturk, she was grabbed by ICE. It got a lot of coverage. It looked like a kidnapping, talking unmarked people, no badges, no warrants, masks, about a half mile from my office in Cambridge. A tough student. What was her crime that she was sent to a prison in Louisiana for 6 weeks for? She wrote an op-ed that the school paper published, calling on them to be transparent with their investments and to divest from Israel and companies supplying weapons to Israel. So this is a peace issue, and the roots of the migration crisis, people fleeing, has a lot to do with U.S. policy, as I'm sure many of you know. A man from Stop Arms to Mexico, John Lindsay Poland, gave a great presentation for us a few years back, and he put up a couple of graphs. This was the MIRA initiative. It was a George W. Bush plan to give a lot of guns to the Mexican army and police in Mexico to fight against cartels. And the graphs showed the amount of guns we were sending and the murder rate spiking. They looked like the same graphs. Because when you flood a country or a region with guns, more people end up shooting each other. Wow, it kind of seems like common sense, right? But yeah, this is a peace issue for us. And for years and years, decades even, we have said that if you do endless military adventurism abroad, guess what? That's going to come home and affect you in different forms. King said that every bomb that we drop lands here in poor neighborhoods in the form of poverty, but it also comes home in the form of militarized police, right? The 1033 program you might have heard of, that's where they take all the excess automatic weapons and grenade launchers and these big tanks that the police end up driving around in, and they give them to the police. And as a result, the police have begun to look like occupying soldiers, and they have begun to behave in that way. And there's no better example of how militarism comes home than ICE, militarized federal police. You've probably seen the videos coming out of Chicago, coming from the Trump administration. They're bragging about what they're doing, rappelling from Black Hawk helicopters, smashing windows, dragging people out of their homes, shooting people in Chicago, federalizing the National Guard, sending National Guard from other states into Illinois, and Massachusetts is on that list, people, without the permission of the governor. This could lead to real constitutional crises. But the good thing is that people are standing up and they're pushing back. And how many of you have been to the Burlington ICE headquarters? A few of you. Yeah. Well, yeah, good number of you. For those of you who haven't, I really cannot recommend it enough. And it's expanding. No. You just need to stand. No. Well, I mean, we're building power. I mean, I'm reminded, I wasn't around for it, but I keep hearing about the resistance to apartheid in South Africa. And people protested, and eventually people were going into embassies and consulates and getting arrested. And then eventually senators including a Republican senator or two, were going to consulates and embassies and doing civil disobedience and getting arrested. And that's when the United States said, enough is enough. So we have to build towards that. It's going to take a long time. But the Wednesday event, and I have many of these for you in the back, was started by two people 24 weeks ago. Two people, Jared and Laurie, married couple. You should meet them. They're wonderful people. It grows and grows every week. Last week it was a bit lower turnout. Wednesday it poured. Oh. But the week before that, 711 people in the middle of a Wednesday on a weekday, right? It has since expanded to Thursdays. They're doing it on Saturday morning now. A local group of artists and street theater folks who make these fantastic signs and interactive puppets and things are putting it on. And that has the most chance because working people can go to that one. But this Saturday, they're getting really ambitious. The same people who have mobilized for No Kings and Hands Off are doing an all-day. It's called Burlington Bastion. They're doing dawn to dusk, 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. Coalition members, they're doing it in shifts. The people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts don't like this. We didn't vote for it. And even those who voted for the president are starting to have some regrets because he said he was going after criminals and things like that. No, they're getting people on the way to work. They're getting people on the way to volleyball practice. They're showing up at churches. They're showing up to courtrooms and walking into the middle of trials and grabbing people. And judges are furious about it, right? They are trampling on the Constitution and due process. Many other creative things are going on in Burlington right next to this SOAR that is New England ICE headquarters. They found out who owns the land, right? Who is leasing the land to ICE. And he's a big philanthropist in town. Bob Murray's his name. He's the same guy who funds their Little League team. He owns the fancy restaurant that also houses weddings and is the watering hole of all the town officials. His name is Bob Murray. So they're just showing up on Friday nights, and they're doing it in fancy dress because it's a fancy restaurant, and holding signs saying, just telling the truth. And I've seen people drive past the signs into the restaurant and turn around and drive out. So we're going to put the man to a decision, right? What's more important, his relationship with ICE and the money that he's getting from them, or his reputation and his other businesses that he cares about? So creative forms of activism are popping up, and people are motivated. And one thing that I have been, and I'm going to raise up what you were talking about, Liz, because I got this from MIRA. I have been talking about the Safe Communities Act. I passed out thousands of these in Burlington because people are hungry to do something. And the Safe Communities Act does everything that Liz said. The easy way to explain it is the law that Mayor Wu's being attacked for expands it to cover the whole Commonwealth. And before I moved to Burlington, just last month, I had lived in Boston for 15 years. Many of you who are living in Boston know that when Josh Kraft first announced he was going to take on Mayor Wu, that was seen as a somewhat credible threat. But then when they subpoenaed Mayor Wu and she stood up and said, "You're not going to tell us how to police. We have the safest major city in America," partly because our immigrant communities feel like they can contact the police if they need to, and they don't have to worry about ICE showing up next week because they did the right thing. Now, when she showed backbone, suddenly Josh Kraft's campaign became a joke around Boston, and she whooped him by 50 points in the preliminary, and he had to drop out. So showing fight against the criminality of ICE and what's going on in our communities, in our neighborhoods, And I really want to thank the efforts of LUCE too, because I remember early on the fear, people sharing things in Facebook groups and not knowing whether it was real or not. LUCE's done a great service because the fear is a big part of the point of it, right? It's to scare the heck out of you into inaction and despair and giving up and letting this man and his cronies do whatever he wants. And we can't have that, right? So a bit more about the Safe Communities Act, because I crow about this all the time. I love it. I got it from MIRA. It's got a real shot. It has a third of the legislature already signed on to it as petitioners, right? It has massive amounts of support, especially in the Boston area. And the advocacy, it does work. I called up my state rep. Finally, he picked up the phone, talked to him for 15 minutes. Next day, he was on it. It works. And this little interactive flyer actually has a QR code and a link. 30 seconds. You type in your address, it automatically looks up your people, and you can send a letter to them. There's also a hearing coming up for it, because every bill in the state legislature is guaranteed a hearing. Now, they used to only have to give us 3 days warning, and all the committee votes were opaque and they could kill things. We have a very messed up legislature. Now, that lead time, because of some enterprising activists and a few state reps, credit to Act on Mass and Erica Oiterhoven, is up to 10 days. And we're hearing that it'll probably be the week before Thanksgiving or 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. And we're going to get thousands of people to turn out and testify for the Safe Communities Act, because people are pissed off about ICE and they want to do something. And there is no reason why our police and local officials should be tipping off ICE and saying, Johnny's got a court date, you can come get him, right? Our tax dollars are going to this. Your federal tax dollars, sure. But as long as the police and state officials can collaborate with ICE, guess what? Your state and local taxes are going there too. And we have to put a stop to it. It expands Miranda rights, it stops these tip-offs, and it ends those 287G agreements that the last speakers were talking about. Couple of other things. Hanscom Air Force Base. It's about 15 minutes from Burlington. In Bedford, it's being used by ICE to fly out detainees. A bunch of people from Concord and up in that area started protesting, and they said, oh, don't worry, we're not going to use this anymore. We'll use P's up in the Portsmouth area of New Hampshire. But with this latest surge, guess what? They've started again. So there's a need for protests there as well. And also, very promising, guess who works at Hanscom Air Force Base? A lot of union workers. A lot of union workers are fueling those planes, or if they're completely private, other planes at that facility. They're doing the mechanical checks. They're pushing the paper and doing scheduling. And if we can activate them, and it's being done in the early stages, they can throw a wrench in ICE's logistics and put them to a decision as well. Last thing is, and I don't think I need to convince you, but why this is our fight in Massachusetts. For one, we're well positioned to do so. Right? We are the second most anti-Trump state in the union, behind Vermont. They beat us by a little bit, but hey, I like Vermont, so I got to give them credit. But so if we're going to resist, we're well positioned to do so here. The Bill of Rights that is being trashed right now, right? These people are not using warrants. They're using these little letters that they write to themselves that say, oh, I can round people up. Warrants are supposed to specify people, places, things, and times. It's in the Constitution. And they're not. They're just flouting it completely. And due process, right? The fifth part of the Fifth Amendment. It doesn't say that people, that citizens have due process. It says that all persons have due process. So there's another name for the Bill of Rights. It's also known as the Massachusetts Compromise. It was literally brokered by John Hancock and Sam Adams. These are names that people recognize. You know, our first and second governor. They said, and they were anti-federalists at the time, they said, yeah, well, I guess we'll ratify this Constitution, but only if you put in a Bill of Rights. 5 states followed their example. We got the Constitution for better or for worse. They're violating that deal. And if our first and second governor were the ones who won some of those rights for all people in Massachusetts and across the country, then our current governor needs to do a heck of a lot better job in defending them. She stood at the 250th anniversary of Lexington and Concord and said, due process is a foundational right and I will defend it and I expect you to do so as well. And yet, she has not come out in support of the Safe Communities Act. In fact, every chance she gets, she says, I want to remind you, Massachusetts is not a sanctuary state. That means she's not defending due process. She's not living up to her own words. And one thing that I've found very useful is you show up at her public events. So on the other side of this interactive flyer, you can sign up for a rapid response network. She does show up in public and take questions, and she can't answer them. It's pretty embarrassing. And I have seen her rhetoric improve after she's been embarrassed a couple of times on Boston Public Radio and other places. You can do this yourselves. But until she's actually going to stand up for due process and do something about these masked thugs that are in our neighborhoods every day, threatening our neighbors, scaring the crap out of hardworking people, then we shouldn't let up, because she is the head of the Commonwealth. And if she's not willing to defend our neighbors, then we have to find somebody who can. There's a lot of different ways to get involved. I'm sure many of you already are. But please talk to the activists at that table. Grab some of these flyers. Grab the book, absolutely. Thank you for the background. It really is a result of so much of the harm that we've done in these other nations that have caused migration. So to add insult, to add more injury to injury by this disgusting behavior at home, it can't stand, and we should not allow it in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So please, any way that you can get involved, I encourage you to do so. This stuff works. If we confront the decision makers, especially those who talk the talk, in no time they'll be walking the walk, or they'll be out on their butts and looking for another job. That's all I got for you.
And here's a cordless microphone. Questions, comments, Q&A? Shall we wrap it up then? Don't forget to sign all the mailing lists around. I am making a habit of being at that Wednesday event. I live in Brookline. If you would like a ride to Burlington, be in touch with me. I'll give you my phone number. This has been just wonderful connecting with all these different groups, and it's been an honor to host for you. Sarah, thank you for making this happen, and we look forward to having a copy of your book signed here at the church, and a couple extra copies for possible sale. MIRA, LUCE, MAPA, all of you doing amazing work, and we are at your service any way we can be of assistance to you in additional events, activism that happens here at the church. our Sunday speaker series, anything we can do in service of ending this nightmare for a lot of people I know, undocumented Salvadorans here in town, people who are scared, who don't deserve this. They are hardworking. I always say they're better Americans than I am. You know, work much harder, send money to their families back home, and live scared and live vulnerable. So thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you again soon.